That. Okay. So happy Tuesday, class number 3. How was the week? No homework? That was good, right? Chance to kind of chill. Um, so I'm going to get right into it. Here's my plan for our class tonight. I want to talk about the homework. I mean, I want to talk about what you read, and I want to talk a lot about the qualitative and quantitative, and I have some examples to share with you. And I'd really like to just kind of have a discussion about it. Towards the end of our session, when we're done with the qualitative and quantitative pieces, we'll start to talk about putting a research plan together. And we'll do a little bit each week, okay? Because some of it, we're kind of learning the different techniques and methodologies as we go. So tonight will be about how we get started. Okay? All good? Okay. Qualitative and quantitative. Thoughts. I'm going to talk about both of them. I'm going to talk a lot about qualitative because I have found that that is the approach that most people have not done as much of, and many people have done more quant. But I want to get a feel from all of you. I know we talked about it a little bit last week. Let's talk about what were your thoughts? How many people have done qualitative? Let's start with that. I know, okay, have you run your own qualitative or have you worked with a research partner like a moderator, partner, person to do qualitative?
Both.
Both?
Yep.
Okay. And have you guys written discussion guides, reviewed discussion guides? I mean, what are your thoughts? What have you done?
Yep, definitely helped develop and reviewed and
Okay. Okay.
critiqued.
Others, Lynn, you had said you've done both?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Jacqueline?
So we have worked with partners where we're the recipients of studies that are done. We have had qualitative and some quantitative, but as far as creating the brief and working from scratch, I have not had experience in either.
Okay. Okay, great. Kelly?
I've worked with a vendor to do it, so.
Okay. Thanks,
Yeah.
Steve. Okay. Okay. Scott? Wait, I can't hear you. No, you're off mute. I don't know what's going on.
Oh,
There you are.
There you are.
all right. Yes, I've done both.
Okay. So you have done both. Okay.
Yeah.
Justine? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Just quantitative.
Okay. And Lena, you can just put it in the chat if you want.
No, I've done both.
You've done both? Okay.
Right.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So then I mean, for the most part, I am going to take the time to talk about qualitative and quantitative and where they fit. But as you went through the videos from Mark, thoughts on where qualitative fits versus quantitative? Did it make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just my 2 cents, I guess. As far as qualitative versus quantitative, have been heavily involved with the quant side, but I feel like qualitative really kind of hashes out like the driving factors, I guess, why more answers more of the why people make the choices they do rather than the choices that they do, which is you kind of see in the quant side, right? You kind of see like the behavioral economic side of things in quant, whereas the qualitative, you kind of get more on the psychological side. That's kind of my takeaway from it, kind of looking at it. So.
Yep.
I
agree.
always-
Yeah, I would say,
Others? Go ahead.
I always
I
say
was gonna
that.
go ahead, Liz, sorry.
I always say the qualitative adds color to the quant. It gives you the why and the stories behind what the numbers mean. That's how I use it primarily.
Go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think of quant as much more about measurement. Like you're trying to get a solid measurement of whether it be attitudes, behaviors, whatever. Whereas the qual is really more about exploring what those are.
Any other thoughts? Anybody else have any builds, thoughts? We are going to talk about it in detail.
Yeah, I think what stood out is kind of like what Lynn said, but just like the story behind it. I think that was maybe in one of the articles, if I'm remembering correctly. But it really like creates a story behind the numbers essentially with the why.
Yep. And
So-
how, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, a lot of it is used, I think, as a exploratory tool. So again, I think it depends on what what type of research you're trying to do. Positioning research versus product, development has two different, methods and potential designs. So
Yep. I think it comes down to the questions you want to answer. It comes down to what you know and the questions you want to answer, right? And then how you're going to use it. I'm just reading Steve's comment. Yes. Yep. I was just going to ask that question of how have people used qual and quant together, or have you, and in what order? Steve just threw his example out there, but go ahead, Kelly.
I was going to say, I did quant first and then did qual second after, because the business partners wanted to kind of get a deeper dive into what they found out from the quantitative study.
Okay. And how did that work? Did that work okay?
Yeah. I think they got some of what they were, but honestly, it just kind of reiterated what they already knew, but yeah.
And was the quant, I mean, oftentimes people will do qual before quant. I'm not saying that there's a prescribed order, but that is a more common order, because you may not know what questions you want to put into your quantitative work. Did you feel that your quantitative work felt okay because you kind of knew what you wanted to ask?
Yeah. We just wanted to kind of get like a deeper dive into some things, obviously with a survey, you can't ask, I mean, it would just be longer and longer as you add more verbatim questions. So this kind of allowed us to ask more detailed questions where we really wanted to find out more information. So that's kind of why we did that.
Got it. That makes sense. Others, anybody, have you used a qual before quant, quant before qual? Some examples from others?
Yeah, I would
I've
just
done-
say, sometimes you don't really know what it is you're going to learn. So to just throw together a quantitative survey asking questions that you think might be what you're trying to solve for, maybe. So you need to do the qual first to really just get a sense of what, whatever the topic is. I mean, it's hard to say this in just so broadly, but so that way, when you actually go to do the measurement in the quant, you have some basis for what it is you're going to include in there. So I have typically done, I'm doing some right now, actually. I'm doing some qual next week, which will be followed up by a quant study shortly after. So
Nice.
yeah.
Groups or IDIs, or what's the format?
IDIs, they're business owners, so they're a little tough to, get in a room, and we don't have as many of them, and they're going to be spread out all over the place. So it's just easier to do something, IDIs. So just it's really a factor of the audience, I think.
Yep. Yeah, totally makes sense. Time and place for different approaches. Lynn, go ahead.
I've done it both ways. I usually start with qualitative if it's a larger project. Basically same reason, Lori, because you need to understand what you want to look for. You may have an idea, but we've often come up with didn't think of that someone brought up in a group, and you need to include something on it. And it's been a surprising. You would have missed it without talking to people before you could actually design the quant piece.
Yep. Makes sense. Others? Anybody else have any thoughts, comments before we actually go through some stuff? Other stuff? Anybody else? So Yeah, so just to talk about this just a bit more. So, qualitative, just reiterating what you were all talking about, is really about exploration. It's trying to understand the why, or to even kind of figure out something that you actually don't know. And you don't know that you don't know it. I mean, there was a piece in one of the videos, it's about, 50%, I can't remember the exact number, but usually when you go into these, you have to kind of go with that mindset of not you're trying to validate your hypothesis. You have to go in with that mindset of, okay, I'm going to learn something out of this, and it's going to be interesting and different because, people who are not me and not my coworkers are going to talk about my advertising, my new product, how they shop, whatever it happens to be, whatever they do for banking, whatever. And there's probably going to be different nuggets that we're going to find. So it's really about kind of uncovering those pieces and looking for how things connect. And I don't know, for anybody who's sat through qual, it can be inspirational. Sometimes it is a head nod, but sometimes you sit there and say, wow, I hadn't really thought about it that way. Or
Mhm.
that was an amazing way to articulate it. And sometimes we do qual to get consumer language, right? Because we all talk internal words, right? We talk about, this and that, and we have the words, we call them, I mean, having worked in consumer products for a very long time, packaged goods, we talk about, the category is called blah, blah. No one talks like that. No one thinks about things like that. We do, right? Because that's how we put our things together. But when you talk to real people on the street, and who use our products or could be potential users or, whatever it happens to be, people talk in different ways. So again, qual is about learning, and about exploration, very much so. And quant is much, it's a much more structured approach. And it's about measurement. Now, there are times when you have only $5 in your budget and you have to pick one approach, right? And you can't do qual and quant. Or qual, the people you will be working with need a number, right? And you have $5 or you have one day to make something happen, right? So sometimes, we end up doing a quantitative survey with open ends, right? And you can do open ends. Now that's not qual. That's a quantitative survey with open ends, right? So that's different. And open end, that would be, you'd have 100 open ends and you can code them, natural language processing, a lot of different things. Some people put them in word clouds, whatever it happens to be, but that's a way to get around it. And I'm not trying to complicate things, but I did want to say that out loud because you may run into that, in your career where someone's going to say, well, you've got $5 in a day. You're going to have to pick out what you're going to do, right? And it happens. And it happens more than you'd like it to. Okay, that all makes sense so far. I think we're all kind of in the same place on that. For those who haven't done qual, does that make sense in terms of what we're talking about? Right? Okay. I don't want to make the qual more complex. It's about think exploratory. I don't have the answers and I need to go talk to people who are my users. Maybe they're non-users, maybe they're competitive users, whatever they happen to be, so I can understand what they're thinking. Maybe just generally, maybe about a brand, maybe about my website, maybe it's how they shop, whatever it happens to be. But that's why I go out and I do qualitative, right? And it also gives me the opportunity, it gives me context, right? Because sometimes you get an answer and you're like, wow, I wonder why that's that way. But in qualitative, you could talk to people about what's on their mind and what kind of things are, oh, the economy is really weighing on me and I can't do this, or, I don't like that store and that's why I've never bought that brand, or I never saw it on shelf, or I've never seen your advertising, or I never go to that, I would never do that. I'm afraid to put my money in anything that isn't a standard bank, right? So I don't use these financial apps. I'm just thinking about like all different types of things that people could say, and that's why qualitative will help us, right? And it helps us really get some understanding. And what I like to think about when I start to think about qualitative or quantitative is, what are the questions that I'm trying to answer, right? So what do I need to learn? And when I know that, when I learn what I've kind of set out to learn, what will I do with that? There was an article, and Mark mentioned it as well, as kind of imagining the process backwards, right? And, not to overcomplicate that, but you need to really think about the end. I always ask my stakeholders, how are you going to use this? And if you were to imagine what the end of this research looked like, not telling you, oh, it's going to tell me my product is amazing, but like, oh, it would tell me that this is working or this isn't working, and this percentage of people are interested or not interested, something like that. Because you need to know those things because it will help you structure your research as you go along. So just think about that, because we're going to use that as we put our research plans together as well, because we're going to think about what's the end deliverable? What do we need to do, to launch the game, right? Okay, how are we going to get there? What's it going to take? Same thing for this thing on qual versus quant. What am I trying to answer? So this is just a piece of it. What are the questions I need to answer? And then will I do qualitative or will I do quantitative? Okay. And the assignment for next week, which is the monk fruit thing, I don't know if you guys read the case study at all. It's just a few paragraphs. I'm going to pop it up in a minute. We're going to decide, or you are going to decide as part of your homework assignment. It gives you a challenge, and you're going to decide to meet that challenge. Are you going to do qualitative or are you going to do quantitative? Okay. And don't take it as you can only do one. I will say that out loud. Okay. There's not a right and there's not a wrong answer. I will be looking for your rationale. If you choose qualitative, I want to understand why you picked qual. If you choose quantitative, I'd like to know why you've chosen the quantitative. There's more to the assignment and we're going to talk about it in detail. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes.
You're all different kinds of qualitative. And I'm going to spend a little bit more on time on that because I think generally people may have done more quant than qual, but I want to just talk about the qualitative for a few minutes. There are a lot of different ways to do qualitative. You could do groups. I mean, the most traditional way are focus groups. I mean, pre-COVID, focus groups in person, 2 locations, if you were looking for geographic, kind of spread, and maybe 5 to 7 people. Post-COVID, there were online types of focus groups before. There's a lot of IDI action now. There were IDIs before, but it was hard to do IDIs in person, and there wasn't too much online going on. I mean, I can just tell you that at one point when I was at Unilever, my qual partner and I spent weeks traveling across the United States talking to men to understand how they were shopping for personal care products. Anyway, so things have changed a bit. Anyway, so but now IDIs are very popular. You can do online IDIs because you can get, as Mark mentioned, you get a lot of geographic kind of differences. You can cover off on a lot of geographies, and you can cover off on a lot of different types of people, depending upon what your target set is. There are also different ways to conduct the quals. But I don't think we need to think as much about the technicalities. I'm most interested in number of people you think you need to talk to and who you might want to talk to as we do this. So that gets me to this piece. So for all the qual that you guys have all been a participant in or partnered with, How many people have you talked to? Give me some rules of thumb, guys. Thoughts? Should we do 50?
So
Should we do 10?
I think it depends on,
If I was-
who, go ahead, sorry, Lily.
yeah. Oh, I was gonna say, if I was just doing standard set of groups, let's say in person, I'm just gonna say, I would probably do 6 groups, like you said, and recruit 8 with expectations for, 6 or 7
Mhm.
maybe in the group, usually have a no-show or not, or 2. But that's basically, like you were saying, usually like 2 locations, and maybe you have a couple of different age groups or whatever. But I think what Scott was going to say, it really depends on, like, if you have a lot of different sort of segments that you want to understand, it becomes a little more complicated. And so you're going to have to do more groups if you want to look at different audiences. So that's all.
Yep. Scott, was that what you were going to say?
Yeah, that was. Thanks, Lori.
Sorry.
Any other
Yeah.
thoughts?
For IDIs, I usually like to try to do it around 12, assuming it's a general, because usually after about 8 or 9, you're hearing very consistent themes, and the last couple are sort of confirming what you've heard. If you need more segments, that has to go up somewhat, but schedule 12, one cancels, you end up with, 11, and people always say, is that it? That's all you need? It's not all you need, but it gives you a good direction on where you should be going.
Yep, I agree. I agree with all perspectives. Remember, it's not quant, so you don't need 100 people, right? You need a few people, right? You could talk to 3 people. The standard is probably about 8. If you're just dealing with like one group, if you're going to do men and women, and you weren't looking for any particular diversity. I don't mean their ethnic diversity you could get within 8, but if you weren't looking for like different segments, right? They were all in the same segment, you might be able to do 8 and 8, 8 women, 8 men, something like that. But I agree. So as you think about qualitative, don't think 100 people. Think, oh, I'm trying to learn. And it's not about validating Lynn's point of view with Lori's point of view with Kelly's, right? It's about, oh, I've heard some really interesting things. And as I look at all these pieces together, it raises something new and interesting for me, or something I hadn't heard, whatever it happens to be. And then you take it to quant and you measure it and see if it's real and if it really stands up with a lot of people, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to share a couple discussion guides. You guys said you had, and I will send these to you as well. You had said that a few of you had done discussion guides before. So for anybody who's not done qualitative before, a discussion guide is your roadmap for the qualitative, right? So imagine, let's just imagine it's a one-on-one, an IDI, right? Hi, Jacqueline, I'm Debbie, and tell me a little bit about yourself. Where do you live? And it should be very much like a conversation, right? And you will wind up providing a ton of information, but you're probably not going to, hopefully you will not be asked any leading questions, right? Oh, isn't this a beautiful package? No, right? Really trying to get the respondents, so that's what the person is called, who's part of the qualitative, the respondents to talk about things on their own. So to kind of stimulate the conversation, but not to lead them. You don't give them the answers, and you listen. So a good moderator will listen, and the discussion guide should be written in an open way, so that it's just a lot of questions, a lot of discussion, and it's a guide. Okay, what I've found for groups that I've led or IDIs, it's a guide, and the consumer, I would like it to go a certain way. I let the consumers talk about what they want to talk about as long as it's relevant, because it's got to be kind of natural, and you want people to open up, right? And you don't want them to feel that they're really kind of locked down because you're asking them a ton of questions and it's the Grand Inquisition. So I hope that makes sense. So for the assignment that we have coming up, if you choose, again, I'll show it to you in a minute. I'm going to show you the discussion guides first. Qualitative, I'm going to ask, the assignment is that you write a discussion guide. Okay. Don't do the best that you can. Okay. And I'll show you a discussion guide that I have. I have 2 of them. And you can use them as examples, but it sounds like a few of you have already done this. But don't forget to set the groundwork and open up the conversation and really, really give people a chance to get comfortable. And you also need to understand context, right? So, for example, if you chose qualitative for monk fruit, you don't want to go right in, I'm just going to say this out loud, and say, okay, what do you think of monk fruit? Maybe you want to talk about, so, what do you do for health and wellness? Or what kind of beverages do you like? Really get to know the people and understand, what they're about, what they eat, what they drink. And then, you could think of a different, whatever you want in terms of how you would introduce it. I've seen a lot of different approaches, including taste tests in qual. And people have done this in a lot of different ways. Again, no right and wrong answers. What I will be looking for is, why did you choose qualitative? Why did you choose quantitative? And just a flow for the discussion guide, put the questions in. I understand discussions guides can be 8 pages and could take a long time. Get the flow down, kind of when are you going to ask questions, where, things like that. And think about it, if you were on the other side and having of the discussion, what would it be like? Would it get you to open up? Think about, is it going to be a number of groups? Who do you think you should talk to? Are these just, is it like Gen Pop, just men and women 18 to 35, or people who are wellness, enthusiasts? I don't know. I'm making this up, but just these are different things to think about, right? And number of people and approach. You could do groups, you could do IDIs, you could do triads. There are a lot of different things to do. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah. I have a question.
Sorry, yes.
Do we just assume that like budget and time isn't an issue? Like this is just working standard? Okay.
Just do what you think, because this is about approach. I mean, yes, in the real world, you will have a budget constraint and you will have a time constraint, obviously, right? But in this case, I'm not going to tell you what the budget is going to be. And it's the same thing for your research plan. You will see if you read that brief, it says estimate what each of these is going to cost and the timing. We're not going to do that, because I want to make sure that we focus on what would a learning plan look like? What's the plan going to look like? And kind of get those pieces right and know how to ask the right questions. You can always get the costs and figure out what you need to do. Make sense? Okay. If you decide that you want to do quantitative to answer the question, it'll be, and I'm going to show you the brief for the assignment again, but I'll be looking for, what's the structure of your questionnaire? Okay. How do you go from broad to narrow? How are you going to answer the questions that are in the challenge using the quant, just like with the qual? How will you get there? And why did you choose quant? Same thing with qual. Why would you choose qual? Does it make sense? Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so I am going to show you a couple discussion guides. So hang on a second. I'll show you. Let me get one here. You guys see this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this was in person. And let me just tell you what this was. Okay, I was looking for some qual that I had done. There, I could have pulled like an advertising one. I just happened to pull one that was about shopping, because I figured it gives you the same idea, and because It's about being able to do the discussion guide. This was about shopping with people in aisle, in person, okay? Don't worry as much about what the topic was. I've taken the specifics out of it. But these were the objectives, right? So always, what are the objectives? Understand issues in visibility. This happened to be in, for a pack, pros and cons, any changes that needed to be the pack. Introductions, here's where we are. Opinion, thanks for joining us. No right or wrong answers. And we recorded them. We asked people, we did like a warm up. Okay, so I do suggest if you're going to do qualitative, do some sort of warm up because it really helps the chat, right? Because you want people to open up to you. And so you can't really, people are going to open up if you just get right into it. Kind of have to have something like people, if we've gone to offsites or, icebreakers, think of it as an icebreaker kind of thing. In this particular case, I just asked people to talk about what their favorite shopping experience was ever. And people went on and talked about Target and IKEA and Nordstrom and Amazon. And it's great. And it's so interesting because it's great context because they'll tell you why and what they like about those shopping experiences. And because this was not just about a pack, but about shopping and how we could improve shopping, a shopping experience for people, it gave us a lot of perspective without saying, okay, tell us what we need to do to change, right? This is just about context. Okay, so we had like time when we talked about personal care routines and products. Tell me about showering, bathing. This was all G-rated. I don't want you guys to think so, what's your routine? Is it the same on the weekend? What products do you use? Because still, building relationships, understanding context. Okay, we talked about shaving. Brands you've used, brands that have worked, what hasn't worked. Where do you shop for these? What's important to you when you buy products? How do you know if products work? You can see they're all really very open-ended, no multiple choice, forces the people that we're talking to have to answer with more than one word, right? Because it's about generating a conversation. You can not worry about that piece. And then same thing, we'd stand in front of the shelf, we talk again, what do you notice? Open-ended, think open-ended, okay? How would you shop? What packs stand out the most? What doesn't appeal to you? Did everybody understand the personification piece in when Mark talked about it in Qual Techniques? Do you remember it? Anybody? Okay,
The fast food to the car. The fast food to the car.
Yeah, so the idea is I always ask people if they could think of, if let's just say we're doing something on, I don't know, whatever brand it happens to be. I always ask people to tell me if the brand were a person, who would that be? What car would they drive? What do they wear? And what would you talk about with them? Because that's really important to understand, because when they start attaching, oh, they would, they drink of this, they drive of this. Oh, interesting, right? Well, why do you think that? Because you start to see kind of where that perspective is. And you want to know what people think of your brand in this particular case. Anyway, so then we'd have more discussion, and then there's always a close. Clear your head. Now you're away. Tell me the packs you saw. What stood out the most? What would you buy? So I think you get the idea, right? I mean, this is very specific, but I wanted to share it because it gives some ideas about just kind of setting context. Okay. Hopefully that was helpful. I have another one as well. And this one, hang on 1 second, let me just share this one. I will, like I said, I'll send them both out. Okay, so this one was a group, okay? And this was a charity one, right? And for Doctors Without Borders. And we're trying to understand just and it would again, you know, what kind of charities people were interested in. We did a warm-up exercise, right? Where you grew up, your hobbies, so that's really important. Types of charities people have given to, you know, who's donated in the past year. And then we kind of got into, you know, a list of causes that people had said they were interested in. Then we started talking. At the end, we got to Doctors Without Borders. So just rule of thumb, general, think funnel, upside, you know, wide, broad, context. And then you drill down to your brand. If we were doing this for a piece of advertising, right? Or something like that, and you were trying to review your advertising with someone, you'd start out contextually and you'd get to the specifics more towards the end, because you don't want to jump right into it, because you need to learn about people, kind of need to warm the situation up. Does that make sense? Everybody clear on that? Does that kind of concur with, for those who have done qual, is that consistent with what you've done in the past or you've seen? If it's not, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, I was gonna say, I think a lot of times it's important, you know, depending on what the topic is, but you sometimes need to just level set with everyone so that everyone's sort of, you know, trying to, at least you're kind of getting everyone on the same page before you start getting into something
Mhm.
more detailed and more specific, you
Yeah,
know?
totally. One thing I love doing is I love to give people who participate pre-tasks so that they do something before they come to
Mhm.
a group or an IDI. So either we'll have people make videos, you know, about you know, when your favorite products, your favorite advertisement, favorite place to shop, whatever it happens to be, banking, whatever it is, your car. And it's a good chance to kind of see people in action, because you want to make sure people are conversational, because you don't want to get 6 people in a room or a person in IDI and they're like, yeah, no, yeah, no. And so I tend to like to do pre-tasks. And we tend to give everybody a pre-task, and then we screen down from that, because we want to make sure people are conversational. But it also gives you extra information that you can look at afterwards. Okay, does that make sense? For those who haven't done qual, is this comfortable? Do you see how it works? Okay.
Yeah, I just have a question about
Yeah.
the pre-task that you mentioned. So like you were saying, it's to make people conversational. So can you, like, let's say you sent the pre-tasks to, let's just say 12 people. And like, I don't know, 2 people were just completely not what you were looking for. Can you like eliminate them from
Yeah,
that?
yeah, totally. So
Oh, okay.
typically we'll, like, for when I do qual, we'll recruit a larger amount. We send the pre-task out. We use it as a screening tool, right? And
Okay.
then, you know, based on the responses, you'll see, oh, this person wrote 2 words, and this person, you know, was very talkative in their video, whatever it happens to be, you can tell, right? You know, if people are going to be conversational but you still have to balance that with, you need to make sure you get the right people in your group, in terms of, you know, I wanted to get a person from St. Louis, you know, or I need to get people who are geographically dispersed, those kinds of things. Okay. Okay. So let's now look at the assignment for a minute. Okay. Okay. Can everybody see the screen?
Yep.
Okay. Can you see this page? Everybody can
Yes.
see it? Okay,
Yep.
so this is the assignment for this week. I do want to say ahead of time, if there is anybody who has any questions, as usual, just drop me an email. If you have any questions or concerns, or, you know, you want to just chat as you're doing your assignment. Okay, so the brief, we've got this startup beverage company, Monk Fruit Delight, and they've developed this new organic sparkling water. And it has a bunch of vitamins and minerals, and it's sweetened with low-calorie monk fruit. They already have signed some retail contracts, and they're getting ready to invest in their first major advertising initiative. Their challenge. They have a lot of different benefits they could promote in the advertising, but they just don't know what they should do, right? They don't know what holds the most appeal, and, you know, and they don't want to confuse people. People may not know about what monk fruit is because it's not that well known to American consumers. And they're, you know, there's just not sure about where Monk Fruit Delight fits into the beverage landscape. And they've done very little primary research. So what's our challenge? We need to decide, based on the client's challenge, which research method, qualitative or quantitative, is the best first step for Monk Fruit Delight. And then we need to design the appropriate qualitative discussion guide or quantitative survey to answer the client's questions. Need to include a description of the participants or sample you would like to include, and any other methodological details, and a paragraph of why you think the methodology is the best first choice. Again, if you choose qual, that doesn't mean you can't do quant afterwards, right? If you do quant, you could always do qual afterwards, or whatever you happen to decide. I just want to understand why you chose that particular approach. If you do choose qualitative, please put together some sort of discussion guide to at least show that you understand the flow of how things would work, what the sample would be. For quantitative, also how you're going to go from broad into narrow, and how, at the end of the day, how you will answer the questions that are in the challenge. Does that make sense for everybody? Any questions on it? Or concerns? Again, if you have questions, just let me know. Okay. Okay. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about the final project. So every week I'm going to try to allocate some time to the final project so we can kind of think about it together. And I know everybody's going to have their individual take on the final project, but I just want to talk through some ideas. And let me just get to that. Okay, so this is, I don't know if you've had a chance to read the brief for the final project yet. Has anybody read the brief?
Perhaps.
It's okay if you haven't. It's okay. Okay, so some of you have.
Yeah, I didn't understand some things of that, and I'm glad that you're actually bringing this up now, because I had questions, just because I know that I'm going to be missing a class in a few weeks, and I wanted to kind of get a jump on some of this.
Yep, yep.
Yeah. So
Okay.
my biggest questions, just so you know, are around, I don't really understand the game, but I mean, you can look, I can ask my questions after you kind of
Okay.
talk about this.
Yeah, so Hasbro is developing this new board game called Social Strategy. And it's got some elements of traditional board games, but it's also going to have some online elements. So there'll be some digital pieces to it. And the objective of the game is to see who can develop the largest social media following. They've done a lot of work in terms of product development research, right? And $20 million is the initial advertising launch budget, which is not bad. So it's time to start thinking about what to do, right? So the challenge is, they're just beginning their marketing planning. And they need to create a research plan from everything from audience identification, audience insights, audience behaviors, and potential audience motivations to inform a creative brief to creative testing and measurement and evaluation and optimization of the campaign. So basically everything. So our challenge, right? So the final project is about creating a detailed research plan that will inform the brand positioning, advertising, messaging, target audiences, and appropriate launch media. The plan, so there'll be different, I'm going to call them steps, but each stage, you know, why you selected that stage, the objectives of it, I'm going to show you. And you don't have, don't worry about the rough timeline, okay? And I'm not looking for costs. This is about, do you know how to get from the beginning to the end from a research standpoint, right? And I know, you know, you've probably received research, maybe a research brief from a supplier. I'm not sure if you've, you know, I know I asked about a week ago if you had built your own research plans or full research plans top to bottom. I don't think anybody had, but you may have been recipients of it, right? Here's my rule of thumb with research plans. First, you can call it a research plan. I'm going to call it a learning plan. It'll be the same, so don't worry about it. I like to think about a couple things. One, what do I need to deliver at the end? So what's my roadmap? How am I going to get there? What are the steps I need to take to get there, right? And I also like to think about that I'm not really sharing this with me. This isn't for me. It's probably for my internal stakeholders or partners or whoever it happens to be. So it has to be in non-research language, right? Like, why am I doing this? What are the business objectives? How will I get there? What will I deliver in each of the different steps? I put together like a format that I think will be helpful. Does that make sense? And as I said, we'll talk about this every single week, including week 7, but every week we'll talk about this because every week you learn, like we're going to learn something new, right? So we just did something about insights, right? But we also, you know, analyzed a bunch of data, right? We're doing qual and quant now. We're going to do zero, first, second, third party data that'll play into this. We're going to talk about advertising development in a couple weeks. So each piece will play into this. It's almost like you're developing your research plan as we go, right? I'm not saying you have to, but we'll be doing different parts of it as we go along. Is that helpful? I mean, yep, okay. So I've put together a sample learning plan. Again, I'm going to share this with you, so don't worry. It's not meant to be like a quiz or anything like that. Okay, so first thing, sample learning plan. What I want to know or learn when we complete the research and how it will be used. This piece right here. This is the big thing, right? What do I need to know? Okay, I need to determine the target audience, creative approach, and media channels. Or maybe it's about, you know, be market, I was just putting this down, be market ready, you know, with my communication, right? Something like that, you know, be, something like that. There's no right or wrong. I'm just an example, because you all might have different takes on what you need to deliver at the end, right? This is more specific, determine the target audience. It might be something like this, be market ready with my creative. Anyway, but it does come down to target audience, creative approach and messaging, media channels. So what are my learning objectives? Okay, then there's no right or wrong. You might decide there's 7 steps to this or 3 steps. Where I like to start on any research that I'm going to do, especially something like this, because, you know, sometimes you may go off and do just a singular piece of work, right? A concept test or something like that. But this is a start to finish launch of communication, as well as how you'll measure whether it's doing well in market, right? So it's good to kind of have a path. And I like to start with, what do we already know? And that's just where I like to start. Again, you can do it however you want. I always start with, what do we already know? This is kind of like, okay, what other research have we done? It says we have done very little. Okay, so we've done very little. Do we know anything? And what do we know? And what are some of the biggest gaps, right? So what are the things we know we don't know, right? And then probably, you know, for me, I was like, oh, I'd probably want to identify the target audience, define their habits and attitudes. Then understand potential communication, or, you know, the creative and the messaging. What should I do? I have to, you know, maybe I'll test a couple different things that we haven't gotten to that yet in class. Understand what's working and not in the creative approach, and then maybe launch and measure it. And these are very broad. And you may, again, as you go through this and you think about it, you may decide there are 7 steps. There's no right or wrong. I want to say that out loud. The grading on the final project will be, can I understand what you put together, right? So, you know, keep it in a good flow, and explain why you did it, right? If you think it should be this, you know, X, then that's what it is. You don't need to do what we already know. This is just me. I'm just using this as an example. For every phase, you know, for what do we already know step, here's my approach: review current research, synthesize and create hypothesis, identify gaps. Here's what the output would look like, right? Same thing for this: identify the target audience and define their habits and attitudes. What is important when it comes to health? What do they understand about sweeteners? This is the questions we'll answer. This again, this is an example approach. Reviewing 0 first-party data, qual or quant. Maybe I'd have an experiment and my output would be XYZ. But this is what's important: is what step is it? What are you going to do? What are the questions you're going to answer in this phase? How will you approach it? And what will the output look like? Does that make sense? So for each step or stage, I'm going to ask that you'll have whatever the title of that one is, the questions you're going to answer, the approach that you're going to take. So you'll have a whole repertoire of approaches. You know, that's what we're doing right now. We're kind of, you know, gathering all of these different approaches that we can use, and figuring out, okay, where would this fit in here? And, oh, I could do qualitative here because I don't really understand the target audience. And then maybe I'll use quantitative to really kind of define some of the attitudinal information and get some numbers around it, right? You know, there are a lot of different types of ways to do this. And again, it's not right or wrong. This is about making sure that you understand how the pieces fit together. Make sense? You don't have to do it in PowerPoint. This is in PowerPoint. I put it in PowerPoint because that works for me. What I ask, especially for like any of the assignments, as we're starting to put more and more words into the assignment, don't make it like one paragraph without punctuation or paragraph breaks or objectives or anything like that in there, because it'll be very hard for me to find. It's not that I will go through and find the nuggets, but I think that if you could, you know, this is my objective, like on this qualitative and quantitative, whatever you decide to do. This was my challenge. I chose qualitative because of X. I chose quantitative because of X. My sample is going to be this. Here's my approach, and here's an outline for a discussion guide. I'm going to start by doing this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, blah, 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 something like that. Because you may or may not write your own discussion guide going forward. Or you may or may not write your own quantitative survey, just getting back to the assignment for next week. But you should definitely know when you see a bad questionnaire or a good questionnaire or a bad discussion guide, because it could come across. I have watched qualitative where I have seen moderators lead, the respondents. And you're like, wait, you don't do that. Like, don't put words in people's mouths. Or I've seen unbelievable stuff. So, it can go either way. So this is about making sure that you understand the content. Okay. Not that you're going to go off and be a moderator and start writing discussion guides, but really that you know how to use them. You know the place for these pieces of research and why you would use one versus the other. Okay. So on the learning plan, questions, because we're going to come back to it next week. So I want to talk a little bit about it. So then next week I can build this out further and address some of your questions.
I have questions. If nobody else wants to ask, I just feel like I
Oh,
always
Lori,
monopolize
I'm
the
ready.
question. All right. Well, so one of my questions was about this I don't really understand this Hasbro game, that it is, it's a traditional board game, but also digital engagement and social media. And the objective is to see who can develop the largest social media following. I don't really get how that, what that means, but but one of my questions with that is that we're making the assumption that the game is fully developed. There's nothing in this research around getting reactions to the game or well, hold on. I don't mean reactions to the game in an effort to change it or modify it. Like it is like the game is developed and it's going to stay in the state that it's in. Is that fair to say?
Sure. But you could also, I will, quite honestly, I have had students who have put product testing in to fine tune or refine the game, right? Because now, there's a lot of beta testing that goes on with games and.
But that's a little confusing though, because the instructions are about understanding the positioning.
It is.
If the product if the product is not developed, how do you position it? You can't. You have to give us some structure here, because otherwise we're just coming up with stuff.
It is true, Scott. I don't disagree with you, but if it is developed, but if someone wants to put product testing in as a way to refine or even to get reactions to the game and maybe to learn, and maybe that would help in terms of product positioning, that's okay. I don't disagree with you. The objective is to develop the creative, right? So we don't want to confuse like, oh my gosh, we're going to tweak the game and overdo it. But on the other hand, you could have product usage in your research plan to get reactions to the game so that you could see how people talk about it. Scott, does that answer your question? Does that help?
It doesn't help, because I mean, again, if it's just from the environment that I'm in, if we're going back to like my marketing partners don't want to tweak the game, right? They're trying to position the product for launch. And if I go back and start designing a guide that looks at product features and functionality, not in the context of positioning, then they're going to throw me out the room. I'm not. That's my concern.
Yeah, I understand your point. It's not product. We're not doing product development. Okay, to your point, I would think about it as like if you did qualitative. Let me answer it a different way. If you did qualitative and people played the game and you got feedback on their thoughts and what was interesting and exciting to them, that would feed the creative process for communication.
Yes,
I get it.
Okay, I would
that's
think
fine.
about it
That
that
makes
way.
sense. Okay,
Okay, I would think
All right.
about it that way, because it's like it's doing it, that's like a taste test for a new product. You know, getting people's reactions, getting consumer language, things like that. And you don't have to build that in. You know what I mean? Like you can do this however you want. But that might be part of the creative development, or it doesn't have to be. But I have had other people in some of the classes up till now do things like that.
okay, thank you.
I mean, I'm still hung up on like the game itself, like how it works. And I don't know why that's bothering me so much, but I feel like I need a better understanding of the game. Is it a real game or is this all fake? Is it real?
It's pretend.
It's pretend. Okay.
Lori, I'm in sort of in the same place. Okay, it's a board game, but it's also digital. Does that mean you pay it on with people in the room, or do you pay it online with them, or is it both?
Right. And social media is in there too. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that you could assume that people play it together, you know, like
Okay.
you play a board game, but there's a digital element to it. I know that doesn't give you enough information. And I'm not trying to be evasive, so sorry.
Are we going to learn more about the game or is no? Okay.
Sorry. Because don't get hung up on the game.
I'm trying
Okay?
not to. Yeah.
Don't get hung up on the game. This is about how can you get the best creative? Not how can you be the most creative? How can you get the best piece of communication or creative for this game, right? And how do you get to that point, and how will you know it's good, right? And what do you need to know? Who do you need to talk to? What kind of research do you need to do, right? Thanks, Jared. Have a great vacation. Does that help you? Sorry, I know it's a little vague, but don't get hung up on the functionality of the game.
Okay.
And that's why, I mean, again, it's not about, you know, the card or whatever it should be purple versus blue, or it takes too long or anything like that. It's about, you know, okay, people played the game and they loved it and they use these words, right?
Okay.
To describe it.
Mhm.
And it's really cool. And these are the things we should emphasize. And watching people play the game may give us a great insight. Maybe it's some people may decide not to do that. But as you go through this, think about the assignment we did going into the second week, where we looked at all those different types of users and the data. You know, it doesn't pertain to this, but it was just an example. You know, people who like complexity, people don't. We're going to have to just have a little bit of a leap of faith with this one. I know it's hard. It's hard, but think about, it's about the research you'll do, not about how the game specifically functions. And I know it's hard to do that, but it focus on the research part of it.
Okay.
Helpful? Not helpful? Okay, we can talk about it more next week. Think about your questions. And again, when it comes down to this, there's not going to be a right or wrong answer, so don't get stressed, okay? It's about, do you know how to apply what we've learned? Okay? So don't be stressed. It's not meant to be stressful. Okay? Okay, so I look forward to hearing whether you've chosen qualitative or quantitative for monk fruit. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm around. And for those who are not feeling well, I hope you feel better soon. So anyway. Okay.
Happy 4th.
Yeah, happy 4th. Sorry, I forgot. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good
Bye.
night, everyone.